I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
It was literature that was my religion. It was the one system that gave me my sense of meaning and values.
That's acclaimed science fiction author Stanley Robinson.
When I write my novels, I want people to end those novels feeling better than when they began them. That's a kind of calling.
Today we're discussing his recent work, The Ministry for the Future, a fictional mashup of non-fictional hard science and political economy. The novel requires that we ask ourselves what responsibility we have to future generations in a world of inexorable climate change driven by human action, and what the not-so-distant future might look like.
That would be my definition of utopia, not a final perfect society, but just things getting better.
All coming right up. Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Ministry for the Future has upended my life. When it came out in 2020, I was a well-regarded and successful science fiction writer. But then Ministry came out and boom, it made a splash. And I've had to learn what is it to be a public intellectual, a speaker about climate change as if I'm an expert, which I'm not, but I am a storyteller, and the story needs to be told.
That's New York Times bestselling author Stanley Robinson, who is widely regarded as one of the most influential science fiction writers of the past half-century. We're discussing his recent book, The Ministry for the Future, a fictional mashup of non-fictional hard science and political economy. The novel requires that we ask ourselves what responsibility we have to future generations in a world of inexorable climate change driven by human action, and what the not-so-distant future might look like. When it came out in 2020, the novel made Barack Obama's list of favorite books and propelled Robinson to the front lines of the climate debate with its deeply frightening but ultimately hopeful vision of a possible path forward.
I do try to write science fiction of a particular kind, describing things that could happen. I ran it out as a kind of thought experiment with the idea that we don't have to have a master plan. We aren't going to have any magic. We're not going to have any superheroes. It's just going to be ordinary people kludging their way through to a good future. And I wanted to describe that in a way that you could believe all the way through the book. There should be no chapter where you say, as you read it, oh, that couldn't happen. You might say, oh, that would be unlikely or that would be lucky, but not that you would ever say that couldn't happen. It could happen that we could get to a good place in about 30 years.
Though the book itself is written with what The Guardian called a steely visionary optimism, Robinson himself is nothing if not a realist.
I tremble between hope and fear, just like everybody else. The transition to clean energy, it's happening. It's been a remarkable success, and it's a sign that we are capable of escaping this potential catastrophe by our own actions. But it's only going at a speed that has to be described as not quite fast enough. So I'm apprehensive, and young people talk about climate dread, but that dread, which I think is a proper emotion, needs to lead to resolve, to act, rather than to doomism, as they call it, to despair.
So, in the face of so many challenges and contradictions, what is it that keeps Robinson hopeful? As you will hear us discuss, it has a lot to do with the scientists and organizations at the forefront of the climate movement, but it's also something a lot quieter, more pedestrian, perhaps even more encouraging.
There are heroes, but also There's sometimes that ordinary people are put at a crux moment. This is perfect for novels with plots, where their decision has ramifications, and they have to do the right thing for history to go in a good direction. That's as important as the kings or generals, or inventors, or great religious leaders. The whole hive has to be humming. I'm always thinking in terms of the communal achievement, and how can that be promoted by solidarity, by the sense that, look, we do rely on each other. The people that you don't know made your food, build your house, take away your accumulations of trash. They're all crucial to us having the ordinary lives that we have.
And so today, my not so ordinary and quite beautiful conversation with Kim Stanley Robinson. Stan, welcome to No Small Endeavor.
Thanks, Lee. It's good to be with you.
Yes, I'm delighted to get to be with you. I was telling you before we started that I've read more fiction from you than any fiction writer I've ever read, and so especially grateful to get to spend some time with you today. I would love to kind of maybe start with a bit of your biography and the way your own life story has gotten you into your work. I understand that you were a voracious reader as a child.
Yes.
When you think back about those days, what captured you or hooked you into that voracious habit?
I grew up in Orange County, California, which at that time, the 1950s and 1960s, was orange groves and also lemon and avocado and strawberry fields. And then Los Angeles was rapidly expanding. And I saw those orange groves torn out at a rate of 5 acres a day, every day for 10 years, until it was a part of the city. And it had been completely covered by freeways and suburban homes and apartment blocks and shopping malls, etc. So when I was a kid, that didn't register as unusual. That was just the way life was. But to get back to your question, aside from the orange groves, which were going away, suburbia, middle class, safe, calm, actually almost a utopian childhood where I had music through my mom and sports through my dad. But it was boring. There wasn't any color or surprises or strangenesses. It was monotone and regularized, and it was safe, but it was also nondescript. So I ran into books, and indeed the first one that knocked me for a loop was Huckleberry Finn. And little did I know, I had started at the top with one of the greatest books in American literature. I started dressing like Huck Finn, and I forced my friends to dress like Tom Sawyer. This only meant straw hats and a walking stick and cutting off our jeans at the ankles so that we looked bedraggled.
And you were how old at this point?
I was like 7 or 8.
Huh.
And from then on, half of my mental life was spent in novels, kids' books, but also adult books, nonfiction. It was the centennial of the Civil War, and my dad was from North Carolina, and American Heritage magazine came every month, taught us about the Civil War. Imagine that it was only 100 years ago then. My mom came from a religious town in Illinois, Zion, Illinois, literally religious utopia founded in 1895 by an Australian faith healer. And she was a musician, a piano teacher, and so she went to churches in Orange County looking for the best music. So we were variously Methodist or Presbyterian. We landed in Lutheran church, and I played music for her in the church. But truthfully, it was right from then, it was literature that was my religion. It was the system that gave me my sense of meaning and values. All that was abstractable from the stories that I was reading, which I was reading at a tremendous clip. The library allowed me to take home 10 books a week, and I would always max out.
Indeed.
And then I would return them all and get 10 more at the library. And there were 3 local libraries, and my mom patiently drove me to these libraries once a week. And when I got my driver's license at age 16, she was so happy because I could go off and drive on my own. So that was my literary childhood. Yeah.
Fascinating. When folks ask me who don't know your work, and they'll ask me, how would you describe what Kim Stanley Robinson is doing? I'll often say something like, well, he's deeply realistic, and he's saying we're kind of screwed because we haven't taken seriously the great threats we face. And yet somehow he's also hopeful, but not naively so, but seems to have some sort of deep sense of hope that humanity will somehow find a way forward, even in the midst of all the ways that we've been so stupid. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment of at least one of the facets of how you're trying to go about the work you're doing?
Well, yes. In fact, thank you. It's a very generous assessment, and I feel that it's accurate. And we are indeed in a perilous situation. We don't know how close we are to running the biosphere over some tipping points where the warmer it gets, the faster the warming process itself will go, because we'll unleash some methane that's frozen in the Arctic permafrost. But you mentioned hope, and I would again want to give credit to my mom, who was an optimist by policy. In other words, it was morally important to stay hopeful for other people, to support them. And then that included, in my sense, being a science fiction writer, the people of the future too, who when they arrive deserve to have the same healthy biosphere that we were given, to the extent that we were. So describing that project, it can be called utopian science fiction, and I'm happy with that. That's what I do. There's stories set in the future, and many times the future is struggling to achieve a better society and a better relationship to the biosphere and the planet than we have right now. And that would be my definition of utopia, not an end state, not a final perfect society, which is obviously impossible, but just things getting better. And truthfully, that's an enormous generator of new stories. Ordinary literature describes the relationships between individuals and their consciences, and sometimes to a certain extent their societies, but they seldom go on to describe these individuals, these characters who are crucial, their relationship to their planet, their biosphere that is their home.
I reread Ministry for the Future in leading up to our conversation today, but my recollection of the first time I read it a couple of years ago was that I read the opening chapter and was so overwhelmed, I put it down, and I don't think I came back to it for half a year. And so I raise that to ask the question, as you look so realistically at some of these horrors that we are not only facilitating, but are going to have to perhaps navigate, how have you processed that yourself emotionally? What's that like for you to navigate that sort of weighty reality that you're grappling with?
I've had to think hard about that. I remain frightened. The Ministry for the Future starts with a heat wave where the combination of heat and humidity goes so high. And this they call the wet bulb temperature, but often in the States on weather channels, they'll call it the heat index. So dry heat you can handle, and I've felt it myself here in Davis, up to like 115 degrees without a problem because it's dry and you sweat. But if the humidity is high, like 80% or whatever, it only needs to be 90 degrees, and the combination, when you get to a temperature called wet bulb 35, will kill you in a few hours. So you can die of overheating just like you can die of freezing. And this was news to me, and really even news to the medical community, that there was an upper limit on human tolerance for humid heat. And one of the hottest wet bulb temperatures ever recorded, like a wet bulb 34, was right outside Chicago. So the whole of the Midwest and the Southeast of the United States, having high humidity when it's hot, is in danger of rising global temperatures that when they spiral up into a spike, if the electrical grid goes down, then nothing you can do will save you. You could be indoors in the shade, fanning yourself as hard as you can with all your clothes off, etc. In several hours, your vital organs would overheat and you would die of hyperthermia. I portrayed that in the first chapter of Ministry for the Future, and I've got to put it in context here. My readers knew me as basically a comic writer, as you say, hopeful and utopian. So to open that book and read the first chapter is like being punched in the gut by a friend. And I have never read that chapter aloud to an audience. That would be improper. That would cross the boundaries of human propriety. I wanted to make the point that we cannot just adapt to climate change. We cannot continue to burn fossil fuels and, being such clever creatures that we are, simply adapt to it and go onward and let the chips fall where they may. That won't work. Many of us will die. of that. And it's not just the tropics. It goes right on up to the latitudes of Chicago. At the point I wrote it, 2019, there were adaptationists saying, don't worry so much about climate change, we'll just adapt because we are so smart. And I wanted to make the point that's not true. We have to cope. We have to decarbonize the atmosphere. So I started with that.
Let me push you a little bit more on the original question there. What has that been like for you then in grappling with those realities internally, emotionally, for yourself?
Well, as I said, I remain frightened. There's many a person, especially in America, the richest country on earth, who will proclaim that it's already game over, that we're cooked, we're doomed, etc. Well, that you have to push back against. It's clear when you walk outdoors on an ordinary day that it isn't quite true. We're not doomed because we can change what we do. And right now, new clean energy is cheaper than building new fossil fuel energy production. Well, this is crucial. You no longer have to be saintly. You don't have to pay what they called the green premium. In other words, pay extra in order to avoid carbon dioxide emissions. It's cheaper to put in a solar panel than it is to put in a new oil well. That means that we could squeak out of this alive. So I tremble between hope and fear, just like everybody else in their own personal life. This whole division between hope and fear is super basic to our emotional set. And in literature, it translates to dystopia, expression of our fears, and utopia, the expression of our hopes.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Kim Stanley Robinson. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can always get show notes for each episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode, and you can get a full transcript there in the app or on our website. We would be most delighted if you tell your friends about No Small Endeavor. Invite them as well to join us on the podcast. That helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world and grow the community of folks that are talking about the stuff that you're liking to talk about and listen to. Coming up, Stan and I discuss the faith of his childhood and the awe and wonder to be found in and through science. Hello friends, Lee Seacamp here. Do you ever wish you had more folks to discuss the conversations we offer on No Small Endeavor? Something like a podcast listening club where you could engage big ideas about what it means to live life well and then discuss it with friends and companions? If so, you have stumbled upon the announcement you have been waiting for. We're pleased to announce the start of Endeavor Together, our new initiative that equips and nurtures close-knit communities to talk about the things you actually want to talk about. Each small group conversation series is built upon our podcast content and provides you with super easy to use content with questions, videos, links, and guidance so that you or any good and willing soul can host small group conversations exploring what it means to live a good life. Maybe you'll meet in homes around a table, maybe in a coffee shop or local park, maybe at work during lunch hour, maybe in a church Sunday school class. What we are providing is the scaffolding for good conversation. The rest is up to you. And here's the best part. Thanks to generous support from the Lilly Endowment, it's free. The first two series have been released. The first, Let's Disagree Better, and the second, Vulnerability. Get started today. Visit nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Enjoy. Another way that I've described your work is you often introduce us to either ignored or widely unknown historical and human tendencies. They could be economic, psychological, scientific, as a way of enkindling a new imagination for things that might be possible. Is that something that's close to your consciousness about what you're doing in writing science fiction?
Well, it certainly was in Ministry for the Future. Yes, this was almost a blueprint. Here, let's do these things, we'll be better off. And that's why the book is filled with mini essays. They aren't exactly essays. Usually they're somebody ranting or eyewitness accounts, things that people saw, but also little descriptive passages like a Wikipedia with an attitude.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to lay all my cards on the table and say, this is how this book is working on you. Let's think about that also. So there's a little chapter on ideology and a little chapter on group formation and the nature of history. There's a bunch of riddles in it and different subgenres or forms. It's a formal experiment, and in that I mix a lot of smaller forms together and whip them up into one novel. And this is what I love about the novels, is the novel it just means new. It doesn't have a necessary genre. And the standard novel now, which is like 20 chapters of dramatized scenes, it wasn't always that way. There was a lot more summary, there was a lot more narrator commentary. And I made use of the whole history of the novel, and even with the riddles going back to Anglo-Saxon, these older forms, or the it narrative, where the speaking narrator is a violin or a coin, in my case, a carbon atom or a photon. These all come out of the 18th century. So I ransacked the whole bag of tricks, truthfully, to make a kind of grab bag deliberately, so that you could see us coping with climate change and getting right with the biosphere is not going to be a simple or planned process, but it's going to be the result of us flailing to try to do good things. And that's why I wrote the novel the way I did.
You mentioned there a moment ago ideology as one of the small chapters there in the book, and that's one I had noted. You say ideology, an imaginary relationship to a real situation. We all have an ideology, and this is a good thing. Some kind of personal organizing system is necessary to make sense of things in ways that allow one to decide and to act. What would be some key elements of your own ideology that you might not have mentioned yet?
Well, how could I put it? I'm an American leftist, and I want to keep that as vague and broad as possible, because basically I'm a novelist trying to write good novels, but that's my politics. So I'm always for public over private. I'm always for the commons over property. I'm always for government over business. My wife was a federal scientist. I'm always for science over other systems of inquiry. And I retain from my mom this sense that you have to have a sense of the larger community and of the sacred, that you should have a devotional attitude towards reality. And rather than just trying to get more of everything, to try to have a project, and this is the ideology called existentialism, that you have to make up the meaning that you believe in, and then you have to turn it into action by way of a project, which is a life project. I'm going to try to do this or that. And that gives your life meaning, and then you can function within that with pursuit of happiness, you might say. But in terms of a general plan of action, I come out of a Lutheran tradition. The gatherings are important, the rituals are important. There's a long chapter near the end of Ministry for the Future where they are attempting to create a kind of a planetary religion, which is really the oldest one, a kind of shamanism or first religion that left Africa with humans 120,000 years ago, when modern humans as physical specimens began to leave Africa and occupy the rest of the world. That religion went with them. I think that it's 100,000 years old at least. And you can take the characteristics of a shaman figure, what they do, how they act. And quite a few of the Old Testament prophets were clearly shaman figures. People sometimes talk about Gaia, but let's just say Mother Earth is a kind of a home, but also could be something to regard as sacred and deserving of our devotion. And so I also think of scientific study as a form of devotion, as a kind of a active prayer. Let's see how this thing works. Let's see if we can help people with how it works. Let's see if we can cure diseases and make the sick well, and also just make everybody also more comfortable.
Obviously, given that ideology and in reading your books, especially Ministry for the Future, power, capital, economic justice are matters that are always close to the surface and sometimes explicitly discussed at some length. And you also, in that regard, point to the small number of people with extensively disproportionate power. Unpack a little bit for us how you think about that and how you frame that.
Power is different than wealth, and the two are sometimes conflated. But you can be quite powerful if a lot of people do what you say without being particularly wealthy. But if you're immensely wealthy, you can also buy a certain amount of power. So yes, the wealthiest 1% in this country and in the world own about 50% of the wealth. And this is unsustainable and bad. And the poorest 50% of people on this planet own something like 5% of the wealth. They are just flat broke. And they have nothing but their labor power to sell. And if they can't sell that, then in some countries they're supported minimally by the society. And in other countries like ours, they're just left to die. When you go homeless in America, your average lifetime is 5 years. And in that entire time, you're struggling to live, to exist. Most of them are not suicidal, and nor have they given up. But without a home, the elements are too harsh and your health begins to descend. My wife helps with a communal free meal. And even in Davis, which is a prosperous little college town here in California, there's about 250 homeless people who are in the process of slowly dying despite their struggles against it.
You've mentioned a couple of times your childhood and your mother's Lutheranism. To what degree have you carried some of that with you? And in what ways have you rejected that and found other sources of inspiration or direction or guidance for yourself?
Well, I would say that it's in me deep. And what that means, though, since I'm a secular person, and I think that the universe is obviously miraculous, whether there is a maker of it, I don't know. And so I shift the registers into something that is more like, okay, I'll grant this, the biosphere is sacred. Life is strange in that it seems to be anti-entropic and semi-miraculous. We don't know how life began. We do know a lot about how it operates now, but we don't know how it began in this universe. We don't know how the universe began, but we know it happened 13.82 billion years ago, and I laugh hard at that 0.2 because the astronomers, they got to be kidding me because it's a little bit indirect, their reasoning here. But they have their reasons. They would point to the data and the evidence and the methodology by which they came to this number. So what does it mean? Here we are. I don't have a good explanation, but I would just say that there's still a feeling that I have that you should have a purpose and that you should try to be helping other people as best you can. But literature's my game. So then when I tell a story, when I write my novels, I want people to end those novels feeling better than when they began them. Well, that's a kind of calling. Mm-hmm. And when I titled The Ministry for the Future, that was specifically using ministry in its 2 or 3 different meanings, including the religious sense of an office or a calling. Mm-hmm. And yet it's also a diplomatic or bureaucratic place. So it's a very useful word. And the title of the book is part of its success. People immediately are intrigued. They're thinking, well, what would that mean? If you advocate for people who aren't even born yet and are generations or centuries away, what do we do in the present to help them out? And how do we give them voice in our decisions that we make now? That's a topic that is, somewhat to my surprise, it's really on the table these days.
What comes to mind when I ask you what have been some of those sacred moments that you've experienced?
Well, several of them have been in the Sierra Nevada of California, where I've made about 150 backpacking trips through my life, and I love the place. And it's wilderness in the sense that it's national parks. It's protected by humans, and humans are just to be visitors in these spaces, and the mountains are gorgeous. And some of them have to do with seen animals, sometimes rare animals like the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, which was listed under the Endangered Species Act as in danger of going extinct. and was therefore given federal help and went from 100 individuals up to 600. And then the snows of 4 years ago killed about half of those. They're still in danger, but they might survive, and that's a human effort to bring them back. To see one, I never expected to happen. And then suddenly I was looking at about 10% of the whole species, a herd in a meadow, about 30 of them, mothers and fathers and children. And the kids were gamboling around in this meadow. They were goofball fun. And I realized that life, and especially the mammals, all mammals are cousins to us, very closely related genetically, but also spiritually. The Muir called them our horizontal brothers and sisters. That's been important. I was there when my wife gave birth to our 2 sons, helping out as best I could. Those were transcendent moments. Life slapping you in the face where you actually see it. The distinction here is you can see, like in the Himalayas, you can see rock and ice, or in Antarctica, where indeed I've spent some time. Rock and ice and sky, it is mind-boggling. It has an aura of majesty or sublimity that is very powerful. So standing on the polar plateau in Antarctica with nothing in sight except for me, because the vehicle had driven off over the horizon, it was a sheet of ice that was 10,000 feet high, totally horizontal, no clouds in the sky. And so it was being put into some kind of geometrical object, a flat white plane, a blue dome above me, and me. So what was that? That was me in the cosmos, but it was also not alive. That was strange. That was a different kind of transcendence. The more normal kind, I think, is to see life in action, like a weird salamander in a stream in an old-growth forest, and everything looks really ancient. So these moments where you see a complete biome that was living like it was before we entered it, maybe in the terms of the Bible, this is some kind of Eden moment or pre-Eden before people arrived, and you get a glimpse of it. Those are the kind of things that hit me.
Coming up is a short break, followed by our discussion on intellectual humility, the power of ordinary people, and the relationship Stan has with his characters.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Another thread that I see often occurring in your work is various commitments to or celebration of epistemic intellectual humility. How would you suggest we cultivate that?
We're like bees in a hive. A bee is an incredibly competent and powerful individual, but they need the hive. Or another way to put it, given that we're mammals, is that we're herd animals. And although quite amazing as individuals, we're also members of a herd. So humility is there's so much that we don't know. So you can study the universe right back to the Big Bang up till now and in incredible detail, down to the atomic level and even the subatomic level. You can know an awful lot about how things are working, but right at the edges of our knowledge, there's a very deep mysteries. Dark matter, why gravity and quantum mechanics don't mesh up, in a certain sense, the more we know, the deeper the mysteries at the edges get. And also, why is it all here at all? So very quickly, you can walk right to the edge of looking out at a big ocean of unknowing from the shore of your knowing. And this, I think, leads to various kinds of senses of the miraculous, of the mystical. Oh, it's all a mystery. I mean, that is not a trivial thing to be a mystic, to acknowledge the mystery that our knowing sits inside of and say, the mystery is important too.
Both in the Mars trilogy, oftentimes, as well as certainly in Ministry for the Future and numerous other books of yours I've read, you don't give us heroes the way a lot of fiction gives us heroes, but you give us like bureaucrats and scientists. What's your thinking there?
Well, in the Mars trilogy, in Green Mars, I have one chapter called The Scientist as Hero. And that was on purpose, that naming act. And yet, science is a team sport. It exists as individuals agreeing to work together and check each other's work and then work through institutions where they all link arms at the elbows and say, we say this together. What's a fact? Well, it's something that has been so investigated that scientists and other people agree we don't need to look into this any further. The sun's going to come up at a certain time of day. The solar system is what it is. The facts become the facts as a general agreement. They're revealed, you might say, by inquiry. There have been remarkable individuals who, through their intelligence and courage and persistence, managed to change their whole communities and sometimes even the world. So there are heroes, but also this is something out of Philip K. Dick, my California science fiction wild man, the generation before me. There's sometimes that ordinary people are put at a crux moment. This is perfect for novels with plots, where their decision has ramifications, and they have to do the right thing for history to go in a good direction. And this is petty bureaucrats and what my wife would prefer to call technocrats, because there's some technical expertise being deployed for the good of the community. The technocrat has to do the right thing when push comes to shove, and then history goes in a better direction. That's as important as the kings or generals, or inventors, or great religious leaders. The whole hive has to be humming. So I'm always thinking in terms of the communal achievement, and how can that be promoted by solidarity, by the sense that, look, we do rely on each other. The people that you don't know made your food, build your house, take away your accumulations of trash, which is a miracle that we overlook quite a lot. They're all crucial to us having the ordinary lives that we have, and particularly putting food on the table, which has come from all over the world and been shipped to your grocery stores. Well, that's a fragile system, so we have to be careful.
What would you say would be the kinds of criticisms of your work that you find kind of laughable and not worth entertaining? And then on the other hand, what would be the kind of criticisms of your work that maybe kind of metaphorically sit on your shoulder because maybe that there's something to that you want to keep paying attention to?
Well, here's what you can tell with X-ray eyes. Are they on your side? Are they constructive criticism and they're trying to help you and they are interested enough and entertained enough that they think you could do better? Or are they out to get you and making a case against you in a prosecutor's sense? Once I recognize that I'm being prosecuted by someone who's not a generous reader, then I just don't go on. It's not going to help me. It'll just make me mad. If I see that this is somebody who is actually in good faith with the work and has some things to say that will help me. An early review of Red Mars said, oh, this is a fine novel. It's too bad that Robinson doesn't know more about economics. It would have helped him. And that comment was one of the spurs in my butt to make me realize there's always more to learn. And if you're doing future societies, then the political economy of that society is front and central as to how it will work. So I needed to know more. And I would refer that critic and my readers in general, well, try out New York 2140 or Ministry for the Future. And so 30 years after Red Mars, I've sharpened my toolkit in that regard.
Do you think much about the kind of person you are trying to be?
The best part, I think, about contemplation of yourself is, what am I doing that's helpful? What am I doing that's causing me to be stressed? And is this line of thought just me indulging myself in a kind of a fit of righteous indignation? Here's what I'm going to say. A novelist is a person trying to get out of the way and tell other people's stories. It's not being a lyric poet. It's not self-expression. It's like a telephone operator in a 1940s movie. The woman typically is pulling out cords and sticking in plugs, and she's connecting things up, and then people tell their stories. People talk me into things all the time, and my characters talk me into things. I believe them for a while, and then I walk away and I think to myself, but wait, that can't be right. But while I'm being convinced, I'm very convincible. So I have this quality in myself that I've recognized that is an asset to being a novelist. And my characters have arguments. I myself often don't take a side. What I want is a good, clear argument, and I don't know what I think. Should we terraform Mars or not? Well, I don't know, but my characters have very strong opinions about it. And that gives me a story.
Yeah, I was especially taken by, in Ministry for the Future, this sort of argument that kind of runs throughout about violence and the employment of violence, whether it's sabotage or whether it's targeted assassination. And it seems like you have these characters they're arguing about that throughout the whole book. And you know where some of them have come down on that, but it's not obvious where you have come down on that.
Well, I should hope not, but I can say this. I am a pacifist, and I would go with this Swedish philosopher, Andreas Malm, who wrote a book called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which was not a technical manual, but a philosophical tract. And here's what I can say in a nutshell. Never hurt people, never damage people. There's no cause important enough to hurt another human being. But you break a pipeline or you pour sugar into a bulldozer's tank and save a forest. Perhaps there's a moral cause that is a higher purpose. So I would say, if the biosphere is being wrecked for future generations and you need to break some machinery in order to stop it, fine, just don't get arrested, but never hurt another person physically. Now, obviously, there are characters in Ministry for the Future who don't believe that, who believe that if you were to, I don't know, kill 500 oil executives, that would solve the problem. This is not true. There's just replacement. And that poor health executive, United Health, who got shot by some young person who thought that was going to do some good, that person had a family and kids. And when people email me and say, oh, Ministry for the Future is coming true, I'm appalled. I was just trying to describe a future that felt realistic. There's going to be violence. And indeed, when Ministry came out, people were shocked by the political violence in it. And then Russia invaded Ukraine. And then there were the murders in Israel that resulted in Israel destroying Gaza. This world is so much more violent than what I was writing about in 2019, that strand of the novel is no longer causing eyebrows to raise at all.
You have another one of the many essays in Ministry for the Future, one that concludes, I am history, now make me good, which I found a compelling charge. And then at the end of the story, you have this beautiful carnival celebration of the beauty of the world and celebration of community, music. And that made me think in terms of this passage out of one of the Hebrew prophets, Isaiah 25, that has this sort of climactic moment of a huge party and all things having come to some sort of justice and some sort of resolution in that moment in which they found themselves. Or it made me think of the conclusion of Tolkien's trilogy, where he has this magnificent feast and this grand party. And I find those just such compelling visions. As we close, how do you think about this charge, I am history, make me good? What's that mean to you? What's that look like for you? And how would you challenge us, encourage us to participate in such?
Yeah, well, thank you for this, Lee. It's been a pleasure throughout to talk about all these subjects from this angle, thinking so much of my mom and the tradition I come out of. So it's just a matter of putting your shoulder to the wheel Any good work, paid or unpaid, will help. And, we're only 1/8 billionth of history. 1/8 billionth sounds small in some regards, but my wife is a toxicologist in her beginnings, and so 1 part per billion can sometimes kill you or save you in a medicine. You can only do what you can do. You just put your shoulder to the wheel where it seems right. And that can be any work, where you're essentially, that work is being done for other people rather than for yourself, although it does keep you alive and gives you a project. It's what that might be called a koan in Japanese Zen. It's a question without an answer that you have to ponder. How do you make history good, especially when you've got to live day to day and you've got to keep a roof over your head? You've got to make a living. Can that making a living for you and your family also add something good to society at large? Well, yes. So I don't think it's that hard. Just keeping the vision, not just eyes on the prize, because it's not really a prize. It's more of a process. As things go on, less poverty, less bloodshed, more a feeling that everybody on the planet is exactly equal to everybody else and that we're all brothers and sisters. This kind of planetary consciousness of all humans alive today, none of the individualizing details about us or our past or our language, ethnicity, all the rest of it, none of that overrides the sense that we're all one species on one planet. We have to get along. We have to take care of the planet. This is a religious position. So history is often thought of as secular, but it often is thought of as having a direction towards more good. And that's not hard to figure out ways to do.
Stan, thank you so much. It's been a delight to talk with you today. I'm grateful for your work, grateful for the time with you.
Thank you, Lee. This is a special conversation for me, as I hope you could tell.
Thanks. Here's one small closing take on today's interview. First, I should say that I don't these days often get anxious or worried about interviews, but I've been a big fan of Stan's work for a long while now, so much so that our team booked the interview without my input, scheduled for my birthday. Come interview time with the acclaimed Kim Stanley Robinson, I found myself rather excited and a bit anxious, the whole don't meet your heroes kind of stuff. And as it turned out, my time with Stan was a wonderful birthday gift. My only regret was not having yet more time for more conversation. I wish, for example, that we'd had time to discuss the importance of the so-called ordinary person at decisive moments. One of the quiet through lines of this conversation with Stan is his refusal of the superhero fantasy. Yes, kings, generals, or visionaries certainly impact human history, but of perhaps more importance is what happens when ordinary people find themselves at decisive moments. As Stan put it, sometimes ordinary people are put at a crux moment, and they have to do the right thing for history to go in a good direction. This sort of vision undercuts both despair and ego. We need you to show up and do your part. There's no time for an overly indulgent doomism. You and your gifts matter, but you do not matter alone. The whole hive, said Stan, has to be humming. This points toward one potentially life-changing practice, just showing up and putting your shoulder to the wheel on behalf of your neighbor, maybe even on behalf of human history. Near the end of our conversation, Stan offered what felt like a moral center of the conversation. We are, he said, only 1/8 billionth of history. That sounds insignificant, he said, until you remember that on some rare occasions in toxicology, 1 part per billion can kill you or save you. So the task is not to be heroic, it's to show up, put your shoulder to the wheel where it seems right. Any good work, paid, unpaid, that is actually for the benefit of other people. Work that resists the lie that the point of life is mere accumulation, more money than you need, more power than you can justify, more insulation from the suffering of our neighbors. This vision is not a sentimental optimism. It's a life practice, a potential life project. to leave everywhere we go, everywhere we live, every room we enter a bit better than before we arrived. Less poverty, less bloodshed, less hostility and anxiety, a growing sense that everybody on the planet is exactly equal to everybody else. Not a prize, but a process that may leave an inordinate number of graces in its wake. That's a small, but not so small take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend, and thank you for my birthday gift, Stan. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with acclaimed science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson on his recent book, The Ministry for the Future. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.